what their problems are, etc., if you're lecturing on that. We actually have people sign a covenant sometimes at the beginning of our small groups that just gets us all on the same page. You can find covenants online. I'll be glad to send you one if you need one. It's designed for a lifetime, but not in its present state. In other words, you're forming relationships that will last you for your life. But that group is not going to have a life forever. Otherwise, you're just building a clique. Heterogeneity, variety is the spice of those lives, if you will. You want to have different ages. You want to have some singles, some married, some old, some youngs. That's a healthy family, if you will. Keep a list of your prayers. What have you been praying for? Where has God answered them? They won't all be answered. They won't all be answered next week. But look for those answers. They will give themselves to you. These are some of the other principles that apply. So, if we can, let Shirley and I talk to you about the tools that we use, answer some of your questions, get a discussion going, and then we'll talk about pastoral burnout for a few minutes. Here is a outline of a course that Shirley and I taught to leaders of small groups. It just outlined some of the things that we covered. We use a textbook, and I'll show you that textbook later on. It's not the end-all and be-all, but it's one that does work, and if it works for you, then consider it a possibility. It's called the Life-Changing Small Group Leaders book. I'll put one on your table so you can pass around and take a look at it. It's a resource for people who want to lead groups, who've been called to lead small groups. And it's one that we use to teach by. Shirley. So, you and I have led small groups together. What is one of the advantages of small groups that you see?
Well, it becomes like family. I think it's hard to get to really know each other sitting in pews on Sunday. So this brings you together and makes you a little more vulnerable, and you share what's going on in your life, you pray together, you become like family.
That's a very good description of it. When we talk about Bible study versus discussion, where do you come down in it? Is it Bible study more important? Is discussion, relationship building?
Well, I think you should be in both. I mean, I think you should have Bible study that you're in, but your small group is not your Bible study. I mean, it can include Bible study, but our group is, we take scriptures and whatever the preacher has taught on the week before, and we discuss it. And that seems to work for us. But some groups do a book or they do, devotionals. Right now in our group, what we've started doing is each person in the group, we take turns doing the devotional for our small group. And that's taken about a year for everybody to feel comfortable doing that. But, after you're together a while and things happen in your life, you become more intimate, then they feel comfortable.
I'm going to move our chairs over here so we can kind of see everybody else. Tell me about your groups, the groups you've been in, the groups that you've led. What do they look like? Where do they meet? What have you studied? What results do you see? Are the relationships being built? Are there other things happening? How about the failure?
We've read Lifers, I think, for the last 8 years. This next conversation is the first one that we've gone on. And again, I don't pastor a church, but I am very involved with what we do in our church. So we do about 1,200 on a Sunday. And so our small groups reflect what you have here. And our emphasis in small group is connection, not restrictive, and we go over what half the talk about the previous Sunday or what we go into, see what's after. So we kind of understand exactly what you're saying and how to do it. But what I noticed is because of how busy we are, we don't make good small group leaders. Does it make sense? I mean, we can run a small group, we can do stuff, it's the connection part that we have trouble. Because I do between 75 and 90 hours a week between what I do at church and what I do on my job. And so that poses, there's not much time left after family to develop those relationships.
What you seem to be suggesting is that it's not just during the session of the small group that this connectivity goes on, there's something that happens in between. What happens in between?
Well, we had a girl that was in one of our small groups, and we tried to intercede with her husband. It was unsuccessful. He was on a path of destruction with where he was at, and they ended up getting divorced, but we've held her hand through all of that. And it's just, we never would have had that access to them without the small group, because they attended the small group. But so you just don't do life in the small group, you do life out of the small group too. You develop those relationships and friendships with them.
Thanks. Phil, you've been in a lot of large churches. Do you think the work of the kingdom can take place in a large church without small groups?
Not with real depth, at least with my experience. I think we have to dispel the idea that all discipleship happens on worship gathering, right? And it's through relationships. And so one of the things that I've seen, and I'd like to hear your input on this, I've seen it be on more of a contemporary level where you're building friendships, you're sharing life, you're there for one another. And I've also seen it where the leader of the small group becomes more pastoral, which I can see being very effective in a way as well. I'd like to hear your exposure to that. But yeah, I think having some form of breakout, small group gatherings is the only way that you can keep that community feel. I read a study once that we can only accommodate, on average, humans can only accommodate up to 100 people that you know. And I think that may be why the average size church in America is 60 people, because maybe perhaps some cases where it's that number that you can all know each other really well. And in that case, you have a church of 60 to 100 people, you're probably doing well. But if you go beyond that, I can't see how not having small groups would be effective.
Yeah. We also talked about the heterogeneity of a group, having different places. And that means that sometimes not only you're going to have old and young and married and single, but you're going to have new Christian, mature Christian. And so that question that you ask is it more pastoral or is it more relational, friendship, social kind of thing? I think you're going to have to do a little bit of each, has been my experience. And every meeting that you have is not going to look like every other meeting you have. And this in-between material that you're talking about, the mortar that goes between the bricks of the meeting, if you will, sometimes I always recommend, for example, that if I'm going to be the leader, the facilitator, or whatever you call him, that I've got somebody else who's going to be there when I'm not there. And that person helps me with that mortar, too. He helps in between the meetings to, hey, Susie, we were praying for you and your bunions last week. Did you get to the doctor? Have those bunions been removed? How's that working out for you? So that there's that watch care, there's that mutuality, if you will. Tell me about your groups and how your experience has
ours isn't big at all. We started in 2020, so our church is like a small group.
Mm-hmm.
There's only 15 people. They come on a regular basis, and we do it at our house. Because I started doing it at the house because our church shut down because of COVID. So I wanted to keep having church, so I told people to come to my house. If they wanted to keep having church, just come over. And then my mom is a pastor, but I'm the worship leader, and I was the one that kind of started our church because I was like, yeah, just come over, let's do it here. So we kind of just did whatever we did at church, we started doing at my house. So we do have, like, we write down all of our prayers, and I do call people and ask them, like, hey, did you feel better? And I have the thank yous too, when we write all those down, and I have like a list. Like you said, my husband is the one that's doing it for us tomorrow, just in case I don't make it back in time. But he has my list all written down, and then we do the subjects the like week before. So we have like a bowl that we all put subjects in, and then we pull the subject, and then that's the one we talk about for next week. So everybody has a whole week to like write down songs that they might have heard that they thought the sub went with the subject, like poems, whatever. And then we have a time during church that we listen to those songs and we listen to the poems, and maybe they had a video on YouTube, like a little short clip they wanted everybody to watch. And I usually have them tell me before church, so that way I can watch it first. And sometimes people send me songs that I like really can't play at church, but but like I always check everything, and yeah, I like keep a running list. But we're having a hard time growing bigger.
Sure.
But we've only been a church for 2 years, so everybody keeps telling me to slow down. I'm a little bit like,
In his
I
time.
got like ADD, so everything's on fast mode.
Thank you, thank you. Michael, you've been involved in, as a young man, a lot of the newer things in ministry, electronic, Zoom, you name it. How does that play into, or could it be used in a small group situation? We talked about using Zoom, for example. Have you seen anything like that?
Absolutely. Actually, I come from a background where we used to, meet in person. The previous church I was a part of, me and my wife led several small groups as a part of the ministry team. That kind of ties to what you were talking about, like, being able to like smaller groups, and kind of getting that feedback goes back to what you were talking about, to the pastor know the nature of your flock. So getting that feedback. So when we transitioned to Pastor Ren and Jeannie's ministry, that's where we started doing that. So there were some people in person, some people on Zoom. No, they didn't do Zoom. They did WhatsApp or Google Meets. So they use Google Meets, and basically you have people virtual, and still to this day they have some virtual, some in person, whether it be, and they alternate. Every other week is either Bible study or what's called enter in. So it's like a worship service or a Bible study. And so that's kind of like the model we learned through them. And so now that I'm in a church plant, that's what we've begun to do. We've started bi-weekly, we do Zoom. Zoom just works better for us. And literally we just like, hey, I send out the link. Feel free to join us. We have a topic prepared. Me and my wife alternate who leads it, facilitates it. But the key thing we do is make sure that there's opportunity for conversation. Like there might be points where we like, hey, like in studying this, I know this or whatever, but even before I might get to that point, what do you all observe from the scripture? What do you all see? Yes, we saw this too, and did you also notice that blah, blah, blah? And then also being sure to have application questions. So it's great we discussed this, but how does it apply to our lives? How does it apply to your life? And how does that change your viewpoint of what next step God is giving you? Is very essential for us to build that community, and it has allowed people to open up what they're going through, what challenges they may have, and then it allows us to be able to pray for each other at the end and do different things like that. So it's been good.
Thank you, Mike. I'm sorry, I don't know your first name, sir.
Gary.
Gary, tell us about your small group experience.
Well, I go to Pastor Doug Forsyth's church. I'm basically his right-hand man. He likes to tell everybody. Our church, we have like a roster of 50 people, and we're lucky if we have 30 to 40 come each week. So our church is kind of like a small group. And but we also do, like, we started out doing Facebook Live, and then we were having issues where Facebook was blocking our services. So I created us a YouTube page. So we do YouTube, and we have also about 27 to 30 people watching on YouTube each week. So.
Good, great.
Good idea.
Do you find, is there ability to interact then?
Oh yeah, we can talk to people on there. They can leave us messages or prayer requests, and we also direct them to our Facebook page where they can leave us prayer requests. So.
that two-way access is really critical when you go the technology
Right.
route, isn't it? Shirley and I are minister in a snowbird community, okay? So people come to Florida, but they have a home base, they go back there in the
Right.
summertime, come back to us in the wintertime. But they don't want to not meet. It becomes a critically important part of their life. And it's like sustenance to them, this small group. So we went to Zoom when COVID came, and when people go back to other places, we can still meet on a weekly basis. One thing we do to kind of overcome that technology gap, I introduce a question of the day. We do all the other things we're talking about. We talk about the pastor's sermon. We go over the scripture that he's used. We talk about application. We update one another about bunions and operations and children, wayward children, and all that sort of thing. But we have a way of breaking the ice, kind of not a humorous way always, but a relaxed way. It could be something as, tell us what the happiest thing that happened in your life this past week and what you had for breakfast this morning. Kind of a little flippant sort of thing, but in a safe setting, you kind of need to lead into a deeper, this is what I cried about last week. This is what I'm sharing with you because I need healing in. I want to confess something to you, my brothers, because I know it's safe here and I know you'll pray for me. Those are the kinds of things you want to get to. That's the target of growing together in God and getting to the point where you can heal together, where you can grow together. So that's the sort of thing. Now, we have roadblocks that come in our way. There are people who talk too much. There are people who will never talk. What do you do about it?
Really?
And there are people who help us correct ourselves, get out of roadblocks. What do you do about those kind of things? You ever encountered any of them? Perhaps you haven't. Yes, sir.
I'm directing the choir at 91st Street.
Yeah.
Oh, you are?
And it's a wonderful opportunity, not only, you're wonderful musicians, but the sharing time.
Yes.
Hearing the
Yes.
needs, one of our elders, closed the rehearsal with prayer, but hearing where people are, what they're experiencing, it's all good for me to have that pastoral connection, to grow in that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a phenomenon in society called cocooning. Have you heard of cocooning? Cocooning is where you go from wherever you work to your home. You don't go out to the movies anymore. You stream your entertainment. You call for delivery of food, or you drive through a fast food. Who do you encounter in those? No, I don't want to double size it. 2, please. That's the kind of depth you get to your personal interchange. You go to church. You hear wonderful praise music. You hear the pastor preaching. Connection? I'm fine. How are you? That really isn't that. Connection is. Where do you get to be able to share with somebody, this is where I'm hurting. This is where I need a brother to stand next to me. This is where I need your prayer sister. It's in a small group setting. If you have not done small groups, I encourage you to do it. This is one way. It's not the way or the best way, but it's one way. I invite you, my email is accessible through our website. If you can't access that, I'll give you my card. I don't want the learning or the experience or the growth to stop here. So if I can be a resource for you, if Shirley can keep me in check, I'll offer to do that. Okay. We also said we were going to talk about pastoral burnout in here. I don't know whether you came for the small groups or the pastoral burnout, or you didn't know where you were and got lost, but we're going to talk about pastoral burnout. Have you ever had a fellow pastor, a mentor, anyone in the pastorate who's had burnout experiences?
Yeah.
I've heard.
What does it look like? What have you seen in others or yourself? Yes.
When I was younger, we went to a church and the pastor was significantly older, and he said a couple times the only reason that he was still a pastor was because his wife got insurance and he couldn't afford to stop being a pastor. But you could tell that he was exhausted. He wasn't the same as he was when I was like I was a teenager when I noticed that he was like getting burned out, but when I was younger, he was like excited to be at church, and you could tell he was just worn out, and the only reason he was there was for the insurance, because his wife needed it, and he couldn't afford not to be a pastor, so he was kind of like stuck doing it because that was his money. So it was kind of sad to see, and he's still the pastor of that church too, so that's why I don't go
You
there
have to wonder how
anymore,
long
but
he'll be
I
able to
had
do
to
that,
move on
too.
because I could see that I wasn't learning anything from him anymore.
Yeah.
And it was sad, but you could tell he was burnt out, he was giving up.
Anybody else?
I've kind of heard it in certain conversations, even like some pastors, I guess even with the ACC, it's like they kind of like transition because like, it's getting burned out, whatever the case may be. This could be just with me because I'm just new and fresh, but sometimes I just wonder, just like, I guess it goes back to me, that connection and that community, because it's like a lot of times I don't hear like God has called me to move on versus like if you're burned out, it's like what led you to that place? Like, was there some kind of like, was there a lack of like, hey, having a Jethro to say, hey, you're doing too much, you need to get help, you need to, disseminate like some of the tasks or whatever, or you need to have the eyes to bring other people in to help carry the weight, or whatever the case may be, or just like, having a community to pray for you, or so for that fire to reignite, or whatever that case may be. But I feel like sometimes it sounds like to me it's like they've gotten to a place of isolation, and it's just like now it's just like they feel like they are stuck and there's no way out. So it's my heart just to pray for them, to either the light to refire, or them to see. It's like, God, you always show, like there's always a way forward, just sometimes we're not being able to see it. So God, like, help him see what the next step is and put
And
his
he
trace
made
of
a
faith
good
in
point
you.
too about delegating the responsibilities, because he wouldn't do that either. Like,
Yeah.
he did so much, and I feel like that was another reason he
Yeah.
was burnt out. He did everything.
Right.
And even if you asked him, can I help you? Do you need help? He would say no.
Right.
So he kind of like isolated himself
Right.
too. So
And I say
that
that,
happens also.
and I definitely say that in all humility, because that's something
Yeah,
the Lord is
exactly.
training me even now as I enter into like growing and developing. It's like I would have that tendency too. It's just like it feels more safe to do it yourself, but it's like I can't. I have to trust and grow other people. So
Yeah. Well, let's face it, each of us is given a certain amount of energy, a certain amount of giftings,
yeah,
and we're going to come to a place where those are exhausted.
yeah.
If you haven't experienced burnout,
Oh.
the chance of you reaching that are great.
Especially if you don't take a sabbatical or take that. Yes.
And we as men tend to try to do stuff more on our own than,
There are women here.
well, I know, but, if we would try to delegate more and it would help.
Sometimes we need those tools. Sometimes we need somebody to tell us, you know what? You're doing a great job, but you don't have to do it all.
Yeah.
God didn't call you to be
Right.
the cook and the washer and, How do those things happen? How do we get mentored in that process? How do we come out of a burnout
So
situation?
is one of the reasons burnout happens because people lose balance?
Yeah, it sounds like it.
That's one of the reasons. One of the reasons could be that God is trying to move them out of the past.
Yeah.
Frankly,
That is
could
true,
be the
too.
case.
Yeah.
How do you determine that? Because when you're in the middle of it, just like when you're in the middle of any problem, seeing the way out can sometimes be obscured by your focus on you and your problems instead of on the Lord. Sometimes we need somebody to lift our vision
Right.
and put it back on the cross.
Yeah.
Shirley was involved in a church as the director of retreat ministries. And the church that we were involved in used that retreat ministry. In fact, it was founded because of pastoral burnout. Now, before I ask Shirley to tell us all about it, it's one way. It could be adapted to your church situation. I don't care whether it's a small church starting out or a mega church. It could be adapted with certain modifications. But this approach is one valid way that we've seen over decades work to bring people out of burnout, to heal marriages between pastors and their wives,
Yeah.
to bring people out of pornography, to bring people back to a centered approach with their eyes on the cross. Tell us about how that thing was founded and how
Well, this church, started, the pastor, you might have heard of several books, and he was a great piece on there. He had a heart for ministry, prayer. And one time in prayer, he had a vision of a retreat ministry, and it started out by using a bus. So this church was approximately 2,000 members, and they started this ministry, and they had 4 guys get their driver's license to drive the buses. They would go up into North Carolina, Tennessee, South Carolina, all around. They would make contacts with these pastors. I'm not sure how they started that, but they would send out letters and whatever, and invite them to come and go on this bus for a retreat. So they would take them different places up in the Carolinas. Well, then after that was approximately 10 years, then God said, build your own retreat center at the church. So they did that. They had 24 rooms, and they would have 4 times a year, they would have retreats just for pastors and their wives. And they had other retreats, but these were the main backbone of the ministry. Okay, we usually have around 50 that would come, and we would fly them in, bus them in, however, give them a rental car or whatever. They would come to the retreat center, and as they arrived...
By themselves or with their spouses?
Spouses. And as they arrived, we welcomed them and took them to their rooms, and we had we just went all out to make them feel really special.
Did they go through buffet lines, or were they served?
They were served, but they were like, it was such a wonderful time to see them come in so burnt out and just ready to give up.
Yeah.
And they would come in and we would talk to them, and we also had 4 pastors in the church that would minister to whatever need they had.
One-on-one or one-on-two, there was a couple.
And we had breakout groups, we had whatever they needed. They filled out this form, and anything they needed, we were there for them. Well then, that's the first day. The second day, at breakfast, the women meet, the men meet, and we give them each checks. We give them a check for $200 and say, we're going to take you shopping, and you have to spend it on yourself, you can't spend it on anyone else. And so we'd spend the day doing this, and then we'd bring back, we had a big banquet, we had musicians.
And some of that, the purchasing thing was kind of hard for some of the pastors and the women.
Yes.
They weren't used to buying things for themselves, that's why you had that rule, wasn't it? Well, can I buy something for my grandmother?
But anyway, by the end of the retreat, at the end banquet, we would do a video of each couple that came and talk to them about what they have gained or learned during this retreat. And I don't know how many churches were restored because of this 4 days that they spent at this church. And the church, before they had the retreat center done, the church, the pastor, Peter Lord, came up and he said, he was from Jamaica, so he had an accent. He came and he said, we need to have homes for these people to stay in, because our building is not done. They had over 100 homes that opened up and would take care of them for that weekend, bring them to the church and take them back. So I had never been around anything quite like that, and the power of prayer, the power of just listening and watching them being healed.
So that ministry has matured over the years. That retreat center is still there. The rooms are still operated like hotel rooms, if you will. But one spin-off from that is small groups have adopted each of those rooms. And they have redecorated the rooms to reflect some aspect of the gospel, or some biblical character, or something special that sets that room apart. So the people, when they enter those rooms, are blessed. When Shirley talked about the fact that they welcomed these pastors, they would help them carry their luggage into the room, they ministered to them. This was a ministry time the whole time. the pastors, the primary pastors and the others would help serve meals to them. They had, if I remember correctly, a foot washing
Yes, we do.
activity. Have you ever had your feet washed in a pastoral setting?
I've seen it, but I've never, yeah, I was little when our church used to do it when we were little, so I remember watching the adults doing it
Yeah.
for each other, but I never got to participate.
Imagine this pastor who can't delegate, who is burnt out totally, who's exhausted, sitting and having two pastors in front of him with a pail of warm water and a towel, washing his feet, praying for him, ministering to him. And then the next day, sitting in a counseling center, setting, talking to him, equipping him. And it didn't stop there. These people were resourced when they went back home too. But almost without fail, the ending session where we had these video things going on, that's how I was the videographer at those first things. Almost nobody left with dry eyes. It was such an emotional time for them, even recalling it now.
And I think there's power in coming together and seeing you're not the only one that's dealing with this.
Right.
All of these pastors come together and they see, hey, maybe I can survive.
Yeah.
Maybe I can get through this.
And most of them went back to the pastoral field. There were a few exceptions to that didn't, that realized that God is moving me on.
Yeah.
For whatever reason, a change in life, physical limitation, whatever, they were released. And you know that release is almost as healing and
Yes.
restorative as a restored marriage, as a restored vision, because it gives freedom to be in the Lord, to be what the Lord has called you to be. Maybe He has called you out of the ministry at a time. Seeking that and following it is important.
A season.
Yeah.
There's seasons.
We taught you about one way that burnout can be addressed in the church and through a church. Have you all encountered another way where burnout is addressed? Yes, Bill?
Yeah, I'd like to tie small group to this as well.
Yeah.
I can't speak for a pastor who is stepping into an existing church, but I can speak on behalf of somebody who's starting a church. Like it or not, if you're a minister, there is a pressure to bring something relevant and hot and, to have a great delivery on the weekend. And if you don't, people will tell you by two ways: their attendance or their money.
Amen. Or
And
both.
so, and it's a little bit exaggerated, but to some level, you feel like your livelihood is on the line every week. And then as you grow, and you have staff that you're paying, now your livelihood and your staff's livelihood is on the line. So there's a temptation to over-pursue, to be over-available, because, I think at the heart of all of us, we don't want to be people chasers, but we also want to rescue people. And then if you're too available, you're taking every phone call. I've been there. I've been I'm wanting to quit everything. And now you're so available that you're suffering at home. Well, now, if you find yourself in a position where you don't feel like you're knocking out the park in your ministry that you're called to, and you're not knocking out the park at home, it's a recipe for disaster. Having the right people around you is important, but I don't know that we often feel safe enough to tell people in our churches. So going to the small group piece of it, I have two pastors that are now become my best friends, that we have decided to build this into our relationship. And it takes time. You don't just deal with all your frailties and temptations in your first meeting, but we have learned and grown in trust here. And most recently, and I was talking to another pastor just a moment ago, there's story after story of fallouts. Pastors that are coming to the pressures, finding themselves in bad situations, and detonating their ministries, detonating their marriages. And I said to them, because we live far enough away, that I could probably keep a challenge away from you, like maybe hide it from you, but I don't think I would lie to you. So if you point blank ask me a question, I think I'd tell you the truth. And so in that build confidence, we have now come to where we ask point blank questions. Are you having feeling for someone other than your spouse? Are you looking online at things you shouldn't? Very specific questions. to catch it when it's small. You know, because this is what I keep finding happening. Pastors feel like if they share it, they're going to lose their job, or they're going to lose everything, and so they bury it. Well, burying it doesn't heal it. It doesn't go anywhere. It turns into a monster. And what a great recipe for the enemy to let that thing go another 10 years. Your church becomes a big impression in the community, and then boom, it explodes. Gives a black eye to the church, gives a black eye into Jesus, and a life and potentially a ministry is destroyed.
We've never seen that happen, have we?
It's a big deal. Burnout in ministry, there's a reason why only 1 in 10 pastors retire from the pastorate. It's hard, and it can be lonely, and we need to have people around us. And may the ACC be that environment where you connect with people. I would encourage, anyone, sit in different tables, talk to different people.
Amen.
Find a way, get the Holy Spirit a moment, an opportunity to start building some connections. It can literally save your ministry.
AECC has begun a process similar to that, not exactly like it, but every Tuesday night, you may have seen the announcement, we have a Zoom meeting for prayer and fellowship. It's an hour long, and we dial in through Zoom. Now, it doesn't meet everybody's schedule. We're looking for ways to meet other people's schedules, because we've really built some relationships there. We've really been able to talk about things, believe it or not, even in a Zoom setting, that you just have covered. Beginning to be able to ask those questions, those iron sharpening iron questions, is critically important to prevent and address burnout, and to help restore when burnout has taken place. You can help us, AECC, by identifying for us other ways that we can do that, because it's going to happen. It does happen. And God provides ways to get us through it. Somebody,
Yeah, so just even tagging on to that, I think it is kind of like those components, like those 3 components, like having like that sabbatical time, having like small group time as well, and also that getaway time. I think about just different conferences, stuff like this, or just even like pastoral conferences that are biblically sound or whatever, but just be able to like grow, because I feel like you have the Bible college as well, but just also opportunities to grow in community and learn community, be a continual learner in community, even outside of a self-paced environment. Also provides you that opportunity to not be isolated as well. So just kind of like building that into I guess that's what I'm thinking about as I enter this, like building that into just the things I plan out for the year, desire for the year. So it gives you the opportunity, like you have people that are close, you have your personal time, but then you also have just the ability just to have different anchors, so that you can continue to grow.
Well, thank you for joining with us this morning and discussing these items. I will be praying for you and your relationships in small groups and your ability to impact burnout, whether it occurs in your life or in the lives of your fellow pastors or your congregations. And let's just conclude in a word of prayer for